Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. So this month we're finally getting a brand spanking new Kirby game. That one of course being Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which I'm very excited for. But this year also marks the 30th anniversary for the Kirby franchise, which all I can really say is that you shouldn't get your hopes up, since we will most likely only get another Game & Watch with some old school Kirby games on it. Which, knowing Nintendo, those games will be the first 3 in the series. But hey, you never know, maybe they will actually do something interesting for once. And heck, I would already be happy if they just ported over Kirby's Dream Collection from the Wii, since then I could finally play it, since that's one of those games that for some reason never got a European release. Which I always found to be rather strange, since the other 2 Kirby games on the Wii did get a European release, and one of them even got its title changed to better suit the European audience, which is kinda dumb. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that I am really excited for the release of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and I wanna get myself kinda back into the franchise, since the last time I played a Kirby game has been well over 2 years. So why not play what I consider to be my favorite Kirby game of all time, Kirby SuperStar for the Super Nintendo, meaning that I also finally get to use my SNES Classic again, since I don't have a physical copy of the game, and while I do have the game on the Wii U, the game would just look a whole lot cleaner on the SNES Classic, and then I also have to play the game with the intended controller, so that's also a plus. So alright, why don't we just boot up the game and let's get started. Alright, when you boot up the game, you get greeted by this opening cinematic where we see Kirby riding around on a warp star. He then goes to the left and then gets the beam ability and ends up in the logo of the game. This logo is also relatively special, since this is so far I know the only logo of a Kirby game where Kirby is not only part of the logo, but he also has an ability while being part of the logo. Besides that, there isn't a whole lot that is going on here on the title screen. So let's go over to the graphics of the game first. So, with the game being on the Super Nintendo, it has a very nostalgic retro look to it, which I'm a big fan of. The game is also very vibrant and colorful, everything also just pops out, making it really easy to see what's an obstacle or an enemy. Which is quite nice if you're an experienced player or just someone who plays the game for the very first time. But by far the thing that looks the best in the game is of course the Pink Puffball himself. He is as round as he can be and he is as pink as he can be. I especially really like how he looks when he has an ability, since starting from this game, every ability in the franchise will give Kirby a cool head. I especially am a big fan of the look Kirby gets with the beam ability, since not only does he get a funny jest head, he also turns somewhat yellow. Kirby also does this for abilities like Ice and Rock, which just shows that something changed in Kirby after he got the power from that enemy. Which is just a very nice little detail we sadly don't see anymore. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the meat of this game. So Kirby SuperStar is actually really different compared to any other Kirby game. The reason I'm saying this is because Kirby SuperStar is actually designed to be an easy pick up and play kinda game. Why is this? Well, instead of the game focusing on one grand story plus some minigames, the game instead has 9 games in one. Even though the box the game originally came in says it's 8 games in one. There's Spring Breeze, which is a remake of Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy, which for some reason misses some of the stuff like the fight against the blimp Kabula. Then there's Dynablade, which is an adventure where Kirby has to stop this enraged bird named Dynablade. The Great Cave Offensive, which is an adventure where Kirby explores this giant cave and finds treasure, alongside finding his way out of that cave. Then there's also Revenge of Meta Knight, which is a fast-paced adventure where you have to get to the Hulbert as fast as possible and stop Meta Knight from taking over Dreamland. And then to finish off the game, there's Milky Way Wishes, where Kirby travels through space to collect stars from different fountains so he can wake up this clock called Nova and stop the sun and moon from fighting. Then there are also 4 sub-games, starting out with Gourmet Race, where Kirby and King Dedede go neck and neck in a race to see who's not only the fastest, but can also eat more food. Samurai Kirby and Megaton Punch are 2 very simple minigames that only require 1 button, and are mainly just small distractions from the bigger modes. And then last but not least, there's the arena, which is a glorified boss gauntlet, where in every round you go up against one of the many bosses the game has to offer. So you could definitely say that the game has a bunch to offer, and while I do kinda agree with that, everything just kinda blends in together for me. Aside from every game having some unique bosses, there isn't really a whole lot that makes one game more special than the other, but the things that are different do make some games stick out more than the rest do. For example, the Great Cave Offensive is one giant map you get to explore, while in Dynablade the adventure takes place in a bunch of smaller levels which you travel to via a world map. But by far the biggest change is that in Milky Way Wishes, enemies no longer give you copy abilities after sucking them up. Instead you have to find these capsules that are scattered throughout the levels. And if you find one, you get to keep that copy ability and can use it whenever you want to. But of course, level design and objectives aren't the only thing needed to make a good game. There's of course also the gameplay, which in this game is quite different compared to what Kirby is normally used to in the older games. In the game there are 3 big changes to the Kirby formula. First off, there's this new helper system which whenever you poop out an ability, you will get a partner that will use that specific ability. The cool thing about this is that a friend can actually control those helpers in co-op, but in single player, well, the helpers aren't all that useful. On the other hand, the abilities the helpers and Kirby can use are totally fine. In total there are 19 abilities, which there's a fine balance between old and new abilities. You have Jet, which is just fun to fly around with, Plasma, which is a more versatile version of Spark, Mirror, which is a bit of a copy of Beam, but you can now reflect projectiles. But by far my favorite out of the new abilities has to be Yo-Yo, which has a small learning curve, but it's a whole lot of fun. But then there's Copy, which is just kind of an useless ability, since it basically works the same as the normal suck Kirby can already do, but now it won't defeat the enemy. So really the only thing I would use this ability for is for when I feel like having the same ability on both Kirby and the helper. Kirby also has gotten quite the upgrade in terms of how you control the puffball. He can now defend himself by shielding, but more importantly, every ability in the game now has more uses. For example, the sword ability only allowed you to do a basic swing in the older games, but now you can do tons of attacks with it, which this really makes the game a ton of fun. I especially really like how some of the attacks of certain abilities can only be done if you do a button combination, like down, up, B, to make Kirby use his yo-yo as a rope to ascend into the air. The last big change is that there's now a new health system. Gone are the pellets that show the exact amount of HP Kirby and bosses have. Instead there are now these new health bars. These are in my opinion quite nice, but also kinda weird. I like them since the developers can actually use them to make the game a bit harder. They can give the bosses more health, but you won't exactly know how many hits it will take to defeat a boss. The weird thing about these health bars is now that every enemy in the game has one. Even enemies like the Waddle Dees, which normally go down in one hit, have a health bar. Also, for some reason, those enemies will now also take multiple hits before they are defeated, meaning that this whole thing about health bars goes quite a lot deeper, since the strength of the abilities does kinda matter now, which I'm not that big a fan of since it just makes things more complicated. Besides that, there's really only one other complaint I have about the game, and that is that in the later half of the game it's a lot more likely that you will be bombarded by enemies. I especially encountered this a lot in Milky Way Wishes, but that mode is supposed to be the final chapter of the game, so it's normal for it to be a bit tougher. But still, it's something that just kinda bothers me. But something that I really love about this game are the bosses. They really went all out with them, to the point where every one of them feels unique in some way. For example, we have Wispy Woosh, who in this game he still lets apples fall and he from time to time blows out some clouds. But in some of the modes he will get a second form where you have to fight against a sibling duo of trees. There's even a boss that only uses his hands to fight, which now that I'm revisiting this game again, it's kinda obvious that this boss was a bit of an inspiration for Mass Sand from Smash Bros. Then there's also the music of the game, which, oh wow. I already praise retro games more than enough for their art style, but something I almost never talk about is the soundtrack for those kind of games, which is kinda odd, but hey, now that I'm talking about it, the soundtrack for this game is phenomenal. Whoever worked on the soundtrack for this game hopefully got a raise, since I would say that this game has some of the best music the Super Nintendo has to offer. A big majority of these songs are very happy and upbeat kinda songs, but the game also has a bunch of songs that aren't as upbeat, but they don't ruin the vibe of the game. But of course, since we're talking about Kirby SuperStar, I of course gotta give some major props to the theme for this game's true final boss, Marx. Not only is he one of the coolest but also most dangerous characters in the franchise, his theme is also one of those that just sounds great and will also stay stuck in your head for a while. This game is in my opinion one of the best games in the Kirby franchise, and Nintendo thought so as well, since in September of 2008 Kirby SuperStar got itself a remake on the DS called Kirby SuperStar Ultra. This remake isn't that impressive all things considered. It looks pretty similar to something like Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, but it does fix some of the problems people had with the original. For example, you can now just poop out a star instead of a helper, but if you want a helper you can just still poop out a helper. And the bombarding of enemies has also toned down a bit. Besides that, this remake does add a couple of extra modes, which are just added to make the playtime of the game a bit longer, which I really appreciate. But the most important thing about these new modes is that these introduce Mass DDD and Galactonite, which, as you might know, are two of the biggest things the Kirby franchise has going for itself, and I just think it's kind of funny how those two got the start in a remake. But now we got the age-old question, is Kirby SuperStar worth checking out? And I will say yes. Both the SNES original and the DS remake are in my opinion games that are definitely worth checking out. Both of them hold up really well nowadays, and they also gave us some core features which are nowadays still used in modern Kirby games, like the health bars and the ability to shield. I would recommend both these games to anyone who is already a fan of the franchise, but I would also really recommend it to anyone who just wants to see what the franchise is all about. I personally would also recommend the SNES original more, since that's the version that is nowadays more readily available, since you can get this version on Wii U and Switch, and if you have the SNES Classic like I have, then the game will be pre-installed on that little console. Sadly, SuperStar Ultra didn't get this treatment since it only got released on the DS and for some reason never got put on the Wii U to the Virtual Console. But really, either one of those I would highly recommend if you just want to see some pink puffball action. Which this leads us to the end of this video. As always, I want to thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, of course give this video a thumbs up, and if you want to see some more of my content, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel, since it really helps me out with making more enjoyable content. And of course, I'll soon be back with a new video, so until then, stay tuned, Zap out.